In this video, I'm going to show you the quickest way I've found to do captions, otherwise known as subtitles, the bits of transcribed text that show up on the screen when people are speaking. It's a three-step process, not too difficult though. First, we're going to let YouTube make an automatic transcript, which is not good to use by itself, but which I think is an excellent starting point. Don't worry, the final version does not have to be on YouTube. It'll be a file that you can put anywhere. Next, we're going to edit that transcript to make it accurate and readable. And finally, we're going to use a piece of free software called HandBrake to put the subtitles into the video file. This way, you can make either closed captions, the type you can turn on or off. You may have noticed this video itself has closed captions. This is me saying this with the closed captions turned on. How meta is that? Or open captions, which are burned permanently into the video image. The choice is up to you. It's just a question of changing one setting in HandBrake. Before we start, it's worth knowing a bit about how these captions are going to be used. Everybody knows that some deaf people rely on captions. Levels of hearing, of course, vary. Some people can hear all or most of what you're saying, but use the text to fill in uncertainties. You might be producing for people who use sign language, in which case you'll have your own arrangements to get the videos signed, but the viewer or indeed the signer may still be relying on a text version, particularly if you use a lot of specialist terminology, which if you teach in a university, there's a fair chance that you do. There are also people who have what would be called normal hearing, but have various cognitive disabilities, meaning the captions help them to follow what you're saying. But you should also know that in fact the majority of caption users have no disabilities. Captions are useful to people who speak English as a foreign language, people who are watching in noisy environments or who have to keep the sound off, and obviously with lockdowns going on, a lot of people's study arrangements have been less than ideal. People who find the text convenient for note taking, particularly when you mention names or terms they don't know how to spell, and people who just miss things occasionally or find the text a useful reinforcement. All of these uses in combination mean that there's a pretty big audience viewing with the captions. So I've noticed with my other videos, the YouTube analytics tell me that nearly 20%, about 1 in 5 people, are actually watching with the captions turned on. Another point to consider is that if you've captioned the whole video, then that means that you've made a transcript of everything you say, which can be useful to give to people as a study aid, particularly given that it's full text searchable. So, my advice is, as far as possible, caption everything all the time. I don't say that lightly. It's a time-consuming task, but the approach I'm going to show you makes it less trouble than some. I didn't invent this method. I'll mention the other people's work I'm basing it on in the description, but I've added a bit of personal experience. First, take your uncaptioned source video. You need it as a file in some sensible popular format like MP4. So if it currently only lives in your institution's weird streaming service, ask your support people how to get it out of the weird streaming service and into a file. I'm going to demonstrate with a video of me talking at the recent BSHS Online Festival about the history of the internet. Now, we're going to leech shamelessly off YouTube's auto-captioning facility to get a first draft of our captions. Consider this a tiny bit of payback for all the literal fascist content they've more or less cheerfully platformed over the years. Get yourself a YouTube account. I've got one already, as you should know from the fact I'm here telling you this. Click the little skeuomorphic picture of a camera and upload your video file. There are 3 screens worth of options here. You can mostly just use the defaults. Select No, it's not made for kids. Just click Next on the second one. Now, you need to set it to unlisted. That means it's not publicised, won't show up on your user page, people can't search for it, but anyone can access it who has the link, the web address. We need that so that we can give the link to a thing that will download the subtitles for us. So don't set it to private because that won't work. It's not impossible you get someone unexpected accessing an unlisted file, so if you're at all concerned about that, delete the video once we're done with all this. The upload will take a while if you have a slow connection. The longest videos and the highest quality videos can take hours. Do it overnight if you have to. Now there's an additional wait for processing. That all happens at the YouTube end. You can close that. And in fact you can shut the computer down if you like, it doesn't matter. If you don't, you'll see that it will stay at 0% processed for a very long time and then mysteriously finish. This is what it looks like when it's finished. And then you've got an additional wait, seems to vary how long, can be a few minutes, can be half an hour, while it actually auto-generates the captions. You'll know when it's done because on the video itself, a little CC symbol will appear here. There it is. I'll just turn it on and set it going. I've muted this just for clarity. So, looking at the auto captions, the quality of the automatic machine transcription of human speech that you can get from a freely available system like YouTube has improved massively over the past few years. You'll see that with my voice, it's almost always accurate, at least to a level where you can pick up the meaning. Granted, I've got some advantages. I'm a native English speaker, I've got a decent microphone, and I'm used to enunciating, but given that I speak with a somewhat muddy and unplaceable British accent that's probably a long way from anything the developers had in mind, I'm pretty impressed by it. Just in case you are struggling to place it, it's a mishmash of the anonymous bits of South and East Cheshire with a slight strain of potteries which the finest surgeons say they can do nothing about. That being said, there are significant limitations on what the auto-transcriber can do. It's worth knowing something about how these systems work. They're not triumphs of astonishing artificial intelligence. They're mostly just the result of loads and loads of comparative analysis of massive sets of information made by people. In this case, they will have worked through vast volumes of audio recorded in the past for all sorts of purposes when humans happen to be transcribing, compared them to the transcripts, and worked out what most often tended to match. So, the fact that the system got the Welsh town of Aberystwyth right looks impressive, and it's certainly helpful, but it's actually not all that surprising. Aber doesn't get mentioned as much as some places, the corpus is probably US dominated, but it gets mentioned enough, it's a distinctive four-syllable sound pattern, and it almost always maps in the transcript to this group of letters, complete with capital A, which the system is confident enough to include. Similarly and triumphantly, it managed to spell Neil Cassidy's name correctly, which is wrong in the source material, and which I would not myself have been able to spell, presumably because he's enough of an American icon that there's a substantial body of correctly spelt Cassidy references in the corpus. But look at what it can't do. Cyber libertarian, for instance, is too much of a stretch. It's come through as sleeper libertarian. Names tend to be a challenge. Two names which I can spell but it can't, Joy Rankin, whose work is relatively new so it won't be in the corpus, comes through as Join Rankings. It has a tendency to default to common English words when there isn't a combination of proper nouns that's really grabbed its attention. And Dinesh Sharma. Man, Sharma okay, it's obviously met a lot of Sharmas. It slipped up on Dinesh. And there are many combinations of sounds which feel common to us, which are actually not all that well represented in the corpus, or which are easily confused with other combinations, which it will routinely mess up on. And that's particularly true of initialisms. Maybe something like BBC or WTO it would cope with, but otherwise it is pretty much stuffed. It's utterly incapable of getting the name of the BSHS, the organisation that hosted that session. BSHS has come in as everything under the sun except BSHS. So, that's one reason why you don't want to rely on the auto-transcription. The other reason, of course, is that there is no punctuation and very little capitalisation. So there's a real challenge to the reader in working out how to parse the text, particularly, of course, for readers who aren't just using the text as a supplement to the audio, but are depending on it. Many deaf users absolutely hate being expected to use auto-transcriptions. You might say they are substantially better than nothing, but what happens, of course, is that people assume they can just do without the human-made transcriptions that they would have provided resourcing for in the past. Now, we're not going to do that. The auto-transcription is very much a first draft, but it's actually a fantastically useful one because it will probably save you all the trouble of doing the time codings yourself. It is possible to correct the auto-transcriptions directly in YouTube, and some guys recommend this. I don't, I find it slow and inconvenient, but I'll show you how for completeness. At the time I'm making this, for some reason, it makes you go into the old version of the interface, so-called Classic Studio, which has for most purposes been retired. But once you're there, you press Edit, and you can change them on a line-by-line basis. There's also a download option, but we're not going to use it because it gives us the file in the wrong format. We need to download the subtitles in a format called SRT, and there are various ways of doing that, as you can see from a simple Google search. Unfortunately, some of them are dodgy. The Save Subs website, which is widely recommended, I tried today and it was throwing out all sorts of horrible suspect content. So I'm going to go to downsub, which has got adverts but works okay. Now the link you need to give it is just the web address of your video. This one here. Select the SRT version. And we might as well have the plain text version as well while we're here. It's good for making a transcript from. Just show you the difference here. This is plain text format, .txt. Doesn't have any timecode information at all. And this is the subtitle file.srt. Very simple, probably self-explanatory, but just in case there's any doubt. This is simply an order number to identify the caption. This is the time the caption should appear. This is when the caption disappears. And this is the text of the caption. It ends with a return, a paragraph break, before the next one. YouTube by default gives you single line captions. You could put a return here, put another line underneath, and you get a 2-line caption. So let's do the main edit. For this, I'm actually going to close Notepad and reopen the document in Word, mainly because it's much easier to do search and replace editing. So for instance, the word internet, you'll notice has a lowercase I, and it does that throughout. If you prefer it capped up with a capital I, you can do a replace all like that. And the YouTube auto captions, of course, come in with US English spellings. So if you want to convert them to another convention, you might save time by searching and replacing on particular words. A few suggestions to speed the process up. Change the font if that helps you to read. Use the keyboard as much as possible so that you don't have to keep moving your hand onto and off the mouse. The arrow keys are your friends. On a full Windows keyboard, so our page up and page down. Also Home, which takes you to the start of the line, and End, which takes you to the end of the line. Holding down Control, pressing left and right arrow, move you a word at a time. Holding down Shift, left and right selects letters. Control and Shift together selects words. By default, typing replaces selections directly. You don't need to press delete. The actual delete key next to End deletes from the left, whereas the ordinary backspace key deletes from the right. Know the keyboard shortcut for anything you do a lot, so find and replace in Word, for instance, is Control-H. Tab takes you between the boxes. And given the length of time you'll be spending fixing the capitalization on things, it's worth knowing that Shift and function key F3 is a 3-way toggle from lowercase to capped up to all capitals. There's also specialist software available, including an excellent little free subtitle editor called Reasonably Subtitle Edit. This can handle lots of systematic changes to the text or the timecodes. One simple thing which has really saved me a lot of hassle is the option to renumber a chunk of captions if you're adding new text in. For the main edit though, I think you'll be better off with the SRT file just opened as plain text in your word processor. It's going to be a tedious but hopefully not too slow process of bashing through the text, correcting punctuation, and fixing the bits where the transcription went wrong. You will almost certainly find, even if you recorded yourself quite recently, that there are bits where it's not clear what the correct text is. And you'll have to go back to the original recording, find the appropriate place, not a hard job as you've got all the time codes. Meetings with the location of this year's planned not quite to be annual conference. If this happens a lot, you'll probably be best off working your way right through the video, pausing and unpausing as you go along, in which case you may well be best off investing in a transcription pedal. You will also need to think about how closely you're going to represent speech in the captions. One extreme would be the approach that's sometimes needed for legal evidence or research interview transcription, where every single and stumble is recorded with absolute fidelity. That's not going to be useful for a lecture recording. At the other extreme, you could edit quite heavily and try to present everything in clear sentences, although you'd hit a lot of problems because people simply don't speak according to the rules of written grammar unless they're reading a script. I try to edit as much as is reasonably possible, and my loosely held rules are just delete all of the ers and ums, the stumbles, backtrackings, and phatic utterances like so. YouTube auto transcription is actually set to take out the ers itself, and it's pretty good at it. But sometimes they'll come through, often they're mapped to a similar word like our, so look out for them and weed them out. Fix all the capitalization. It's distracting to have everything lowercase and it sometimes causes genuine ambiguity, and impose standard punctuation where it makes sense and where it keeps the text clear. Everyone should at least be using commas to set off clauses or points in the narrative. Deaf people need to breathe. Sometimes, particularly if you were thinking out loud, which is often a useful thing to do, it can keep things lively and spontaneous, you'll end up with a stream of consciousness which defeats your best efforts at a landfall on planet grammar, but you should at least be able to comma separate it. If you misspeak slightly, or you've got redundant words, or there's a small change like using a different preposition that would make the meaning clearer, then I think on balance it's helpful to tweak the caption to say what you should have said. But don't take this too far. If people in your audience who can hear or lip read notice that the speech and text are different, or that there's a chunk of spoken material not represented in the captions, this can be unhelpfully distracting. As a rule, don't add extra things in the captions. If you've got things to add to supplement the recording, put them in another document so that people who don't use captions can access them too. One minor exception to this, there was a point in my talk where I stupidly forgot to check the details of a source I was talking about, and as it could be clearly expressed with just a short reference code, I decided to pop it in square brackets. And one more thing. Remember, the point isn't just to transcribe your speech, it's to describe in text everything that won't be clear to someone who can't hear the audio. Most obviously, this includes any important sounds, so motor stops running, or glass makes ting noise. YouTube auto-transcription actually has some rudimentary sound recognition, so it will try to note when there's music. But if you've included music to set the tone for something, you really need to convey that by being more specific. So you could say traditional Irish music, or cheesy music, or discordant experimental music. If you're doing anything other than a solo lecture to camera, you might also need contextual information about how people are speaking. James struggles to make himself heard above the discordant experimental music, that kind of thing. I was daft enough to choose for my demo a talk where I kept bringing in bits of illustrative video, meaning I sometimes have to indicate when the sources are speaking and when it's me. So, I've now finished all my editing and I'm ready to add the captions to the video. One thing to note, if you've used Word, it should give you these mysterious options about text encoding, either when you open the document or when you save. I've found, I won't go into why, but Unicode UTF-8 is probably your best choice to avoid that well-known problem of strange text or question marks appearing instead of various characters, including accented letters and the curly quotation marks that Word does by default. In particular, the Subtitle edit package I mentioned earlier likes UTF-8, so stick with that if you're using both. Actually, if you do want those captions to be on the YouTube version, that's now straightforward. YouTube won't give you SRT format, but it will accept it. If you do as I'm showing here, the good captions will be there as a separate option to the auto captions, just like a choice of different languages. Obviously everyone will prefer the good captions, so you'll want to delete the others. This is actually how I've been presenting all my YouTube videos with captions, including this one. It's obviously not a solution if you're doing anything outside YouTube. There are ways your users might be able to download the YouTube video with the captions included, but it's technically quite tricky. What we want is a nice straightforward MP4 file, just like we started with, but with the captions. And for that, we're going to turn to HandBrake. HandBrake is another member of the pantheon of astonishingly helpful little free open source utilities designed for actual practical use rather than cooing over at a trade demo. Its main use is actually for transcoding, so converting video from one format to another, or from, say, a high quality video that's a huge file into a lower quality video that's still good enough and small enough to use. It can also do a few other handy tricks. It's not an editor, but if you just want to lop a given number of seconds off the start or end of a video, it will do that for you. And most usefully for us, it will take an SRT file and add it into any video as either closed or open captions. This will hopefully be very simple. First, give it that original MP4 file. Now you need to decide on the video quality of the finished product, which you'll probably want to be the same as the original. If you're working with a high definition webcam, that'll probably be 1080 pixels in the vertical at 30 frames a second. This particular video came via a streaming service and is 720 pixels. These are both standard, widely used resolutions, and you'll see they're available as presets in HandBrake. There are both fast and very fast versions, which is nothing to do with playback speed, but describes how long they take to convert the file. Very fast saves time, but may do a less detailed job. Actually, unless you have a purpose-built video PC, you'll probably find very fast is slow and fast is very slow, and you probably won't notice any difference in the finished product, but just to be safe, I'll use fast here. And I'll just change the file extension to MP4. Functionally, it'll be an MP4 anyway, but some players need their attention drawing to the fact. Now we go to subtitles. Foreign import scan is not a relevant thing, delete that. Choose import SRT and import the SRT. Burn-in is the setting that determines closed versus open. Leave that checkbox empty and you'll get closed captions. the kind your users can turn on or off using options in their video players. If you tick it, check it, you'll get open captions. The captions will be burned into the video file itself, and there will be no way to get rid of them. Anybody who has the video file always sees the captions. If you go for closed captions but choose that default box, then the captions will be on by default but users can turn them off, and if not, then vice versa. Press Start Encode to start the encoding. This part of the process again may take a while, so go and make a nice pot of coffee or drink of choice. Okay, so we're all done in HandBrake. I've run it with and without the burn-in, and so we've now got 3 files. We've got the original, the closed caption, and the open caption. So I'm going to open the closed caption file in VLC, that ever-reliable media player workhorse. Thank you, Emma, for that. Shut up. The captions aren't coming up now, of course, because they're not set to come on by default. The option is not unreasonably under Subtitle, or in fact, if you right-click on the main video, you can get to Subtitle there. It's always track number 1 with this system, and there we have it. Now, the biggest advantage of closed captions is because they're stored separately from the video and they're stored as text, the individual video player can control how they display, and therefore so can your audience. So in VLC, you do that by going to Tools, Preferences, and Subtitles, and there are these various things you can play with. So let's change the font. Nobody likes Arial, do they? Let's make it Bandschrift, and let's try to make it bigger. The strange thing about VLC is that it doesn't actually change these settings until you shut it down and then open it up again. That's if anything too big. And also, although there is a colour option, for some reason it does not seem to be possible to override the white colour on these subtitles. But the flexibility could still be very useful for a lot of users. So, for instance, a dyslexic user might go to Open Dyslexic. And another thing, you may be familiar with a lot of subtitles on films and so forth having a dark shaded background behind them. You can add that. So, again, shut it down. And start it up again. And there we are. Other media players can handle the captions, or at least the ones that are any good can. So this is MPV, and this one's very, very simple interface. It's just this thing here. Captions on. Captions off. And sadly now no longer receiving updates, but in many ways still my favourite, good old MPCHC. In this one you go to Subtitle Track, and then it's that one, and there we are. And similarly you've got a range of options you can change. Let's have Bandschrift again. And this time I have successfully, again after closing and reopening it, managed to get lime green subtitles, and much good may that do me. The potential downside of closed captions is that some media players simply can't deal with them, including infuriatingly some of the really common ones. Windows Media Player, last updated in 2009 but still very much with us, has a caption setting, but it simply doesn't work, at least for the output from HandBrake. Apparently you can deal with the situation by downloading a codec. If you can work out how to download a codec, you can work out how to download a decent media player. Whereas the Films and TV, aka Movies and TV app that's largely replaced Windows Media Player, can't find the SRT subtitles either. There would be a little CC somewhere on this bar if it was bringing them in. You can go to this option to open a separate SRT file, which is of course something that we've got, which works straightforwardly enough, but it's more fiddly than you want to bother most of your audience with. And that, of course, is why some people distribute the burned-in version, the open captions. You can give this file to any player you like, or don't like, and the captions will always be there because they are part of the image itself. You can no more change them than you can change the colour of my shirt. This also means, of course, that there is no way to change them for accessibility reasons, or turn them off if you want to look at something underneath, or stop them falling under the player controls. And it's important to understand that the burned-in images of the subtitles are now the only versions in the file. If you look for the text subtitles in a media player that can handle SRT, they're not there. So, I would say you want to go with closed captions where possible, where you know what media player or streaming service people will be using, and you can guarantee they've got a way to turn those captions on. But I have seen people online saying, please distribute this open captioned so that we can be sure everyone who needs to see these captions can see them. But what's definitely the case is that the definitive version, the highest quality version you save for the record, should be closed captioned or should be uncaptioned with the timed captions in a separate SRT file. You can always make a burned in version of this if you want one. You can never get back from the burned in version to the original. And there are so many reasons why you might want to work up a new version. Correcting mistakes you missed the first time, updates and changes, doing it in different languages. One more thing, I mentioned earlier that if you've captioned everything, you've also made a full text transcript, and I downloaded a plain text transcript version of the auto-generated captions. But since we've already gone to considerable trouble to correct those, we really want to work from the corrected version instead. The best way I've found to do this is using the free subtitle edit program I mentioned earlier. Go to Export, Plain Text, and it gives you a preview. You can have line numbers if you like. Show timecode just gives you the SRT formatting. But what you'll probably want to go for is merge all lines, which makes it into one big long word processor friendly flow. That just saves as a plain text file, .txt, which you can bring into Word. Remember, I'm UTF-8 all the way, which you can restyle and edit as you see fit and save as a proper Word document. You can also do the conversion without installing Subtitle Edit because there are websites out there that will do it for you. Here's one, Subtitle Tools. Just select Convert to Plain Text and do the obvious. This one's not as flexible, it will only give you the version with the line breaks, but that's okay if you don't mind sorting it out on the Word side. Once you've got it as unbroken text, you'll probably find it's a bit too unbroken and you'll need to divide it up somehow for readability. Just as people don't speak in sentences, they don't speak in paragraphs, so there's no point worrying about where are the right places to break, just do it wherever it seems helpful. A transcript can be a different beast from a video. You might want to put in subheadings that weren't in the original, again just for reader convenience. And perversely, after having carefully stripped all the timecodes out, you might want to put a few in, selectively, to help the reader who's using the transcript but wants to check the original context. Again, you can handily do this without referring back to the video yourself, because your SRT file has all the timecodes. And that's all for now. I hope it was useful, and having made the video about how to make subtitles, of course I'm now going to go off and make subtitles for the video about how to make subtitles, which I'll put on YouTube as usual, and in the description there will be links to the corrected and uncorrected caption files and a full transcript both for the internet tour video and for this video itself. I'm slightly worried that I might have got myself caught in an infinite loop of activities there, but if not, I'll see you again soon.